FT8 has become one of the most, if not the most, popular modes in amateur radio today, but I constantly hear the same criticisms about it. That being, it's just a computer to a computer automated messaging talking to each other, and where's the fun in that? And if you've never used it before, you could probably look at the screen and reasonably think, well, is that it? Computer decodes a station, you click them, you get a signal report, they get exchanged, you send a 73, and you're done. So isn't FT8 just incredibly boring? Now that's an interesting question, and it was one that was posed in a recent Reddit post which asks essentially exactly the same thing. And the responses were quite interesting because they show that people are getting very different things out of amateur radio. The person that posted this has tried FT8 and they couldn't understand the appeal. They compared it to something like JS8 Call, where you have an actual exchanging of messages. It's more of a conversation. But their basic argument was that FT8 follows a predefined exchange. You're not really having a conversation. So what's actually enjoyable about it at all? And to be quite honest, that's a completely reasonable question. And the answer is because, yes, FT8 can indeed be boring. If your definition of amateur radio is having a conversation with somebody on the radio, voice to voice, learning about them, having a rag chew, knowing what equipment they run, or just hearing the other person's voice, or just that human interaction, then yes, FT8 is a really boring mode that is not going to scratch that itch for you. And you're not going to discuss their station, you're not going to discuss their signal report, you're not going to hear their accent, you're not going to find out where they're operating from, how much power they're running, all of these things which sort of add up and become a real part of amateur radio. And it can become quite repetitive after a while. You might make a single contact with someone, then you make another contact with someone on FT8, and all of a sudden you've made all of these identical exchanges, and it becomes really repetitive. But the important point to make here is that that's okay. Not everything in amateur radio needs to appeal for everybody. I've experimented and done a lot of things in amateur radio over the many years, and not everything appeals to me. There are some bits that I enjoy more than others, and there's some things that I just don't enjoy doing whatsoever. So it's all up to each person's individual appeal, what they want, and what they want to get out of the hobby. But one of the things I wanted to go through first was why FT8 was actually first conceived in the first place, and that might help us to understand where its real purpose is and how that's sort of been evolved over time, and now to see where FT8 is where we see it today. So it's worth understanding what it was originally designed to do. It actually wasn't designed to become a general purpose HF mode. It was actually developed for weak signal work on VHF, particularly on the 6 meter band, where operators often have to deal with sporadic E openings, which are very short. They have fluctuating signals that fade very quickly. And the appeal of FT8 is that you could make a short contact in a very small period of time before those openings actually disappeared. So the goal wasn't necessarily to have a long conversation. It was to send the bare minimum amount to be able to make a valid contact, that being a signal strength and also exchanging of call signs. Now, I'm a big fan of 6 meters myself, so this original purpose was very relevant to what I do here in my station. Now, I know that not everybody is interested in 6 meters. It's one of those magic bands, but also very frustrating band for people. But of course, if you are interested in the higher VHF spectrum, then this is where FT8 really does become quite valuable. So during those openings, signals may become pop up out of nowhere. They're very weak, and you can definitely make contacts that you would have otherwise not made before. So just over the back here, I've got a QSL card that's sitting right there. And I wanted to point this out because this here is the first station that I ever worked from the United States. I had a goal. I wanted to work the US on 6 meters. I didn't care what the mode was. And this is the QSL card in 2023 that I made for my first ever 6 meter contact. I think that without FT8, the ability for me to be able to make a contact with the United States on 6 meters using SSB or CW with the station that I've got and with the power levels that I've got available to me just would have been impossible or very, very hard. CW especially, because I don't know CW. I know bits and pieces, but I don't know everything. SSB requires much larger signals than what FT8 can accomplish. So my goal was to work the US on 6 meters. I managed to do it. I managed to do it on FT8. Now I've got different goals. So it's interesting how things like that can change and evolve. FT8 was really good in this case, was the propagation was barely there, but we managed to make it work. So how did a mode that was originally designed for 6 meters make its way onto the HF spectrum? Well, a lot of operators saw how effective it was on 6 meters, and then they realized, well, we're at the bottom of a solar cycle, or if we are at the bottom of a solar cycle, we can make contacts and continue to be operating and active on the air, even if the band conditions are really terrible. It could operate under high noise levels, and also you could use very little power, meant that it was very valuable and very appealing for people who operated from a station that suffered from those problems. But probably one of the biggest takeaways from the Reddit responses that I got out of it anyway is that the conversation isn't necessarily the game. For a lot of FT8 operators, the QSO itself isn't really the interesting bit. The interesting bit is more about, can I make contact with a certain station under my terrible noise conditions? How far can I get? Can I work Europe from Australia tonight? Can I just use 5 watts? Can I make this new antenna that I've just built work? Can I get a DXCC on a band that I would never otherwise get because of lack of activity, or that my station is just not set up very well on that particular band? Can I get a new grid square active? Can anyone actually hear me on a supposedly dead band? That's one of the benefits of FT8, is that bands that would ordinarily be completely dead are actually full of activity. The other strong theme that was in the Reddit discussion was around the use of 5 watts and a wire. Now, people love to see how ridiculously far their signal can get off just a small amount of power and just a wire hung up in the air. You can have low power, basic antenna, less than ideal conditions, and you can still make contacts all around the world on all sorts of different HF bands. Suddenly you're decoding thousands of stations, or they're decoding you, and it's just something inherently fascinating about the ability for you to transmit a tiny RF signal, maybe just in your backyard, and having it decoded on the other side of the world. That's what makes radio experimentation such fun, and FT8 makes that experimentation and the results of it very visible. And this is where I think FT8 becomes much more interesting. Now, I'm not just talking about the call signs that are just appearing here on the waterfall that are scrolling past here. I'm effectively watching propagation here in real time. So I can see here that 20 meters is open. Here in my grid tracker, you can see that I am hearing some stations over here, at least one in France. I've got one here in Russia. I've got one down here a bit further south in Russia. And then I've also got the USA that are starting to appear here, as well as Indonesia and parts of Australia. So I'm literally hearing stations worldwide from just the first few minutes of listening here on FT8. So it's a great tool for being able to see you've got literally hundreds, if not thousands, of amateur radio stations that are effectively propagation indicators or sensors of what is exactly happening right now at your station. Now, FT8 isn't without its challenges, but it does solve quite a few problems for a lot of operators and helps them to get on the air. So FT8 can decode signals that would be otherwise extremely difficult or otherwise impossible to hear by ear. Seeing something like a -20 decode is part of the fascination. Like, you ask yourself, how weak a signal can it be? How low can I turn my power down to still make contact? What can this particular antenna that I've just built actually achieve? Can I complete the contact before the propagation fades? That's one of the things on 6 meters that I had. It's a bit of a rush. Can I get the signal in? Can I get the contact in before it all disappears? And FT8 makes it particularly useful for people that have compromised locations, such as apartments, small blocks, high noise levels, limited amounts of power, difficult propagation, or just short-lived propagation. So that repeatedly came up in that Reddit discussion. And sometimes FT8 just simply gets you the contact. Some operators said that there are times when calling CQ on voice, they just get absolutely nothing. They call and call and call, and they get no response at all. FT8 gives them something reliably that they can know will work. And this is particularly relevant when you're getting started. Also, there might also be people that don't actually want to call CQ on the radio. They might have mic fright. They might not be able to pick up the microphone, or they might not feel confident enough to pick up the microphone. Whereas operating on FT8 gives them the ability to be able to do make contacts without actually worrying about messing things up. Now, that's one of the things that I cover over in my mic fright course that you can check out in the link below to help you if you do want to learn how to get on the air and say the right things. Now, the other theme that also came up was that FT8 has very short structured QSOs. Now, there is a little bit of a comparison here because it's not unique in that regard. If you're contesting, usually that's a call sign, a signal report, and you log it next station. If it's a DX pile-up or you're working a lot of stations, usually it's a call sign, you signal 5955, whatever. Thanks, QRZ, you move on to the next station. Usually that's only 5 to 10 seconds. So it's not that much different to FT8, even though it is on voice. On CW, that can also be brief as well, depending on how far you're actually sending. PODA and SODA, same sort of thing again. Often that's deliberately short. One operator's trying to work a lot of stations, or there might be a little bit of a pile up. You're trying to get through them. You're in the park. It's raining. You're trying to get out of the park. You're probably trying to get as many contacts as possible. And I mean, normally nobody actually argues that those QSOs are short or that the QSOs don't count because we're spending 10 minutes discussing the weather or anything like that. So the argument that a QSO only has value if there's a conversation doesn't really hold up that particularly well. So I'm curious, though, to know where you stand on this one, because I know that FT8 is always one of those things that divides people. Do you use FT8? Do you love it? Do you hate it? Do you prefer CW? Do you prefer SSB? Let me know in the comments and why, and what appeals to you or what doesn't appeal to you. Now, for those that say, I actually want to talk to someone, this deserves its own section because it's probably the strongest counter argument to the reason why you wouldn't use FT8 and why it is boring. If what you enjoy about amateur radio is, again, hearing another human being speaking, having spontaneous conversations, meeting people, learning about their station, improving your own skills as well, voice-to-voice communication, rag chewing, etc., then that's completely fine. Go and operate SSB. I highly encourage it. I do it myself. I like to enjoy all sorts of different parts of the hobby, as I mentioned before. Some things appeal to me, some things don't. There's plenty of SSB spectrum that needs to be used and utilized and have people using it. Call CQ. Don't just listen to an apparently empty band and assume that no one's there. Get on the air, call CQ. If you have a waterfall on your radio, have a tune around and try and find someone. There might be someone calling CQ there. And don't give up just the first time either. You might have to do it continuously to try and get someone to be able to respond to. Now, it's one of those things that we don't have to have Team CW, Team FT8, Team SSB. Whichever part of amateur radio you enjoy, you do. That's completely fine. Now, I know that a lot of people also say about FT8 saying that it's stolen people from those particular portions of amateur radio. Now, I can understand that that would definitely seem like it's the case, and in some regards it probably is. But it's not the sole thing that has sucked away people from SSB or from the SSB spectrum. A lot of people say everyone's gone to FT8. FT8's killed the bands. Nobody talks anymore. Well, it's probably not just FT8. We've got all sorts of modes now. We've got DMR, we've got P25, we've got C4 FM, we've got All-Star, we've got repeaters that are quiet as well. We've also got, as I mentioned, SSB spectrum. Even FM on 10 meters is reasonably quiet too. But the truth is that whilst some operating habits may have changed, arguably people that are now using FT8 may not have otherwise even got on those modes in the first place. So we've probably increased our activity overall on the amateur radio bands. And at the end of the day, that's the thing that we really want to be focusing on, because we need to demonstrate to those that actually hold our spectrum to us to say, you should be using this, the FCC, the ACMA, Ofcom, etc., whoever the regulator is, we need to be able to demonstrate that we are using that spectrum and that we are active, radioactive. Now, in the Reddit discussion, there was something that came up quite a lot, and that's worth including in this video, and that's regarding if 20 meters, for instance, is wide open, why are you on FT8? That's as an example. It can be any band. Why would you go and use FT8? And that's a valid criticism. If 20 meters is absolutely booming, there's propagation area everywhere, there's stations everywhere, why would you use FT8 in that regard, being a weak signal mode? Well, my response to that would be that it might simply be because of what the operator wants to do. Now, if I want a conversation, I would go to SSB. If I want to chase DX quickly, then I might choose FT8. If I want to test an antenna, it might be FT8. If I want to work extremely weak signals, it might be FT8. If I want to challenge myself with Morse code and learning effectively a new language, I might use CW. So that's one of amateur radio's greatest strengths. There isn't one way correctly to enjoy doing the hobby. But for me personally, by all means, whenever I hear the bands are open and that they are nice and strong and I'm hearing plenty of voice activity, I want to get in on the voice activity. So I kind of put FT8 aside and I go and concentrate on SSB. That's not saying that you should do that, but that's what I personally like enjoying to do when I'm operating on the bands. And if you're fairly new to amateur radio and you want to learn all the ins and the outs of figuring all the different parts of the hobby, then check out my course, Ham Radio in 30 Days, and I'll leave a link below so that you can do so. So I'll throw the original Reddit question over to you. How is FT8 not boring to you? Or you might think it is boring, tell me why. And if you are interested in getting set up with FT8 and knowing the ins and outs of being able to operate the software and how all of your settings you need to set, then I did a bunch of tutorial videos that are listed over here that you can watch next.